morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the another episode of HR Voices. And today we are joined by Ms. Manmeet Sandhu, who's the Chief People Officer for PhonePe. Manmeet has been an advocate for D&I and has run a number of initiatives for empowering the people from diverse cultures, the diverse employee base at PhonePe and the prior engagements. And she has been talking and has been very vocal and has taken initiatives within the organizations for helping people with disability and absorbing them into the system. So about Manmeet, we will say that she has a diverse experience and she has been working for HR in different capacities. And she has been with Amazon, Sustain Communications, Mercer and Muffoy. So we'd like to welcome Manmeet on board with us. Welcome, Manmeet.
Thank you, Talis. So glad to be here.
Manmeet, you've been very vocal about D&I, and when I spoke to you first, I think that was last year, and you took a session at BW People's event, and you spoke about the diversity, and that was the initial phase that we had entered into IPs with the D&I and started writing about it. So from your perspective, I'd like to understand what exactly is D&I and what is the stage that we are in, at least in India, that we're talking about.
Sure. So I think in some ways, the whole idea of diversity and inclusion is very deeply embedded into the Indian ethos. We as a country have always been very diverse, have had very different kinds of acceptance of whether it be religion, whether it be gender, whether it be sexual orientation. A lot of these are just built into the culture that we have as a country. In some cases, it seems like we've forgotten some of these aspects of life. But if you think about the way an average Indian behaves, very frequently the idea of being accepting and inclusive of different ways of behaving is very much embedded. From an organization perspective, I think the thought really comes from the point of view that when you have different perspectives, different lived experiences, different views on how things need to be done, it leads to an environment where there can be healthy debates, where decisions can be taken more thoughtfully because you consider a wider set of opportunities and options. And that leads to smarter decisions, that leads to more well thought out decisions, and it leads to decisions that maybe factor in a higher number of complexities and a higher number of edge cases, translating into maybe a higher degree of innovation and therefore a longer term success for the organization. I think the idea of diversity and inclusion, at least in the work concept, cannot be separated. Because if you're diverse, but you insist that everybody behaves in one standard fashion and only one kind of voice is allowed, it does not necessarily translate into any of the benefits, because then again, you're saying, forget who you are, forget your own ways of thinking, don't really invest deeply in owning the work that you do, but just basically do whatever you're told. And that does not actually lead to any benefits at all. In organization like ours, which are where IP and innovation is actually at the heart of success, it becomes really important that people are able to consider what alternates might be. If I'm used to thinking about things in a particular way, somebody coming in and helping me think about another way of thinking about things actually ensures that we are able to develop solutions that better meet our consumers' needs and are therefore able to innovate better. So I think it's not like, in general, it's a nice thing to do, but more than a nice thing to do, I think in an organization that gives importance to innovation, having people who can bring in their thought processes and actively discuss them is very important for long-term success.
Just another question, which raises here is that when you're getting people from diverse cultures and diverse maybe orientations who are coming in, so as you spoke that we are willing to accept the ideas and things coming in, but once people from different orientations and things come in, so the ideologues change, the perceptions change. So what is the behavioral aspect? How do you deal with it? Because some behavior which is acceptable to an individual of a certain segment might not be acceptable to the other one. So from the ideological perspective, from the organizational profitability and everything is perfectly fine. But from the behavioral perspective, how do you deal with that situation?
Yeah, I think there are, and again, this we've realized is an ongoing debate and conversation, and therefore we realize that while we have to do some work around getting everybody on the same page, around operating in a diverse environment, a lot of it actually comes to fore when people really start engaging with each other and start having those conversations. I'll give you an example from the people with disabilities space. So, about 2 years ago, we had no one from the disability space in the organization. Today, we have about 19, 20 people, which is a small number given the size of the organization, but it's a start. But what we found was that what really helped was, now this is one of those spaces where nobody says no. Nobody says, no, we must not do it. But when you start talking to them about, okay, would you hire two people? It's like, we do work which is a little too complex. It'll be very difficult for this individual, and I don't know how they'll manage, and so on and so forth. So a little bit of a push from the organization's perspective helps. But what we found was that once people were in, that's when a lot of the change in mindset began to come in, because now you're working with someone who is, maybe they can't see, maybe they can't walk, but they are as competent, as capable as you in every other way. They have a sense of humor, they have a personality, they have capability in delivering on the job. And so then the perception starts changing towards, why did I have all of these hang-ups about this person? This person operates like any other person that I might have. And then you also find this interesting thing of, if you have a team where you have, say, one person with disability or two people with disability, and then when this person goes sort of maybe into a slightly larger forum, the team is naturally very accepting and inclusionary of that individual. They in fact sort of help educate other people about, you're acting strange, you're being patronizing, none of this is required, this person is fully capable of taking care of themselves. So we found that a lot of that change actually comes through not so much through some of the top-down conversations and top-down instructions that we share, but much more about what people learn to do when they sort of start engaging with individuals on a one-on-one basis. This is, of course, the best story I can tell you over here. There is, of course, the other side of it. There is the other side of perceptions that might be sometimes much more deep-rooted around, for example, women and their capability, or someone from the LGBTQ community and their ability to sort of work in that space, because sometimes some of those concepts are much more deeply embedded. Those biases have been put into people from a much younger age, and it's harder for them to fight some of these. But there also, what we've found is that it needs to create a slightly more maybe artificial space for interaction, where engagements about some of these questions sort of come up. For example, with women, there tends to be sort of this idea that, oh, I can't hire a woman because, the kind of team I have, very frequently we work late in the night. And then there is this conversation about, but is late in the night really required to be able to deliver high quality work? And then would not the men in the team appreciate if they are able to start the day at a particular time, end it at a reasonable time, and then be able to spend some more time with the family? Because this is not about reducing the bar of performance. This is just about being more planful and systematic about how your day gets done, or even the expectation that if you want to be successful in this team, you have to work late. If you can change that perception, then everybody, including the women, sort of benefit. So some of these are more nuanced discussions that only happen over a period of time. I will say that we struggled in the beginning with the question of, should we just start a bunch of education and then hire people? Or should we hire people and then let the education continue? And we found that it's kind of a balance between the two, that people will need to be able to interact with individuals, see them as human beings, and understand their constraints and problems at a human level, for them to be able to respond to them and step away from some of the biases that they might have had. And we find that combination helps in creating that right culture much more effectively.
Now, coming back to, when you're talking about diversity means, people, they can be anyone. So how do you formulate a policy for them? How do you, it cannot be one size fits all approach kind of thing. So plus, I think there's a lot of work that HR has to put into it, because when you're talking about sensitizing people with one set of people, then you have another set that comes in. So every time the sensitization process is increased, and the trainings and getting people understand the kind of co-workers that they have increases. So how does your HR, and as you spoke about PWDs who have been working with you, so there are around 19, and I'm sure that they will be again diverse in diversity amongst them as well. So how have you been tackling those parts? And it's not only sensitizing the people who are in the organization, but also the people who are becoming our new colleagues. They also need to be sensitized before they are coming into system. So that's a lot of work that adds on to HR. So your take on that?
Yeah. So yeah, I do think it's a two-step process. One is a broader education and an understanding, which is more about, and also, I mean, I think one of the other things about some of this is that it's not just the education, it's also just some of the mechanisms that you're able to put into the org. For example, continuing the PWD example, we work with an organization that helps us find candidates who might be suitable for roles that we have at PhonePe. And then we do a fairly systematic assessment of what support will the individual need to be able to do their job well. If, for example, they are unable to see or their vision is limited, then it is about making sure that the computer system is set up, there is voice support available, that the office itself is equipped to make it possible for someone who is unable to see to be able to operate independently within that forum. So that by itself allows a lot of independence to the person who's coming in. And it removes a bunch of the constraints that other people might feel that they are now required to sort of demonstrate. The second component of it is that the team that you're operating in, how do they get sensitized? How do they get aware of things that might be different for this individual, but that do not necessarily translate into them getting a perk or a benefit. And so that sensitization conversation tends to be within that particular team and is a systematic education process. And on a broader level, there is just about getting the company as such to understand how some of this stuff might operate differently. Here, it is about the broader org level, simple communication mechanisms that we do. For example, currently, we just finished running a particular campaign where we had a bunch of comic strips that talked about the day-to-day experience of someone who may have visual disability or physical disability, and how colleagues can enable that. We ran a bunch of sessions on Indian Sign Language for people in the company so that they could communicate with with people in the team who may not be able to speak or hear. And some of these larger level things just sort of create an environment where people feel like, hey, I want to be a part of this initiative. I want to be seen as someone who's able to do this well, which then translates into the broader experience being much nicer. And what I found is that we decided that when we would start focusing on diversity and inclusion, our focus will be on women, people with disabilities, and people from the LGBTQ community, largely to address what you sort of mentioned, the fact that diversity isn't one homogeneous group of people who all need the same thing. It is that it is actually a very diverse bunch of people who each might have a slightly different requirement. So when you start with one or two of these, you can start addressing each one of these issues specifically, but at the same time create a consciousness within the organization that there isn't one standard limited side of a person that must be brought into the office. There are diverse elements to even your personality, and we as an organization would like to be inclusive, would like to be accepting of all of these elements. And as you start developing that mindset of saying, just because this person is not like me doesn't make them bad, your ability to actually engage with people from diverse minority groups, whatever those groups might be, sort of goes up. And that's what sort of our experience has been, that as an organization, for example, I'll give you this example. We found that because we have people now have to engage with a fairly diverse set of people on a day-to-day basis that are visually, like you can see that those people are different from you and me at a standard level. Our ability to just have more thoughtful conversations has gone up. work meetings that have nothing at all to do with anything that is to do with diversity as an agenda item are much more thoughtfully conducted, have more easy exchange of ideas, better process of arriving at a decision, because you've sort of gotten used to the fact, like slowly, I would say not gotten used to the fact, but slowly getting used to the idea that something that is very obvious to me may not necessarily be obvious to someone else. My way of thinking might not be exactly the same way of somebody else, and that does not make it wrong. And if I can be open to their point of view, maybe I'll be able to explain my point of view, and both of us in that process will reach a higher understanding of the problem statement. So we've begun to see some of those things, which is really, helping create a mindset which is a little bit more open to the idea of diversity.
That's apart from all the discussions that we have about the D&I, we usually, I don't hear much about the recruitment process for the people who are underrepresented in the organizations. So we might have opportunities which are being advertised for specifically for women, and for the employer branding perspective, we use a lot of words around it. But when you talk about inclusion of LGBTQ plus community and people with disabilities, so how what is the method that is used in reaching out? Because I've seen there's been a lot of discussions, we've been part of a lot of them in past 1.5 years about LGBTQ plus, and you have a few people who have become the leaders and the heroes from the community, but you don't find a lot of representation in the leadership that is coming in. And I think you might be aware of all the names which are there in the industry, and we speak to them, but generally we don't have a decent number of people coming in and the influx going up. So I would like to understand, how are you trying to reach out to these communities? What are the parameters for hiring in case you're looking at LGBT plus, and how are you reaching out to them? And disabilities, I think NGOs are one of the sources for reach out, and what other things could be. So I'd like to understand the mechanism in case you have formulated that, or what does the industry do?
Sure. And I'll talk a little bit about where we are. I will say, however, that there's a lot more work to be done in this space. And I'll talk specifically about both of these spaces. So, and I'll kind of just walk you through how it's been like for us. So people with disabilities, for example, we work with a couple of organizations, yes, who do a fairly good job of being able to educate and train up individuals who are then job ready for various kinds of roles, including a bunch that we might have at PhonePe. And once people are in their growth process, then of course it's an ongoing process. But what we've also found is that as we've had some success in being able to hire and identify people in roles, two things have happened. One, of course, is internally the organization, individuals, managers are a lot more open to considering people for different kinds of diverse roles within the organizations from a PWD perspective. But we also found is that people are a lot more willing to reach out to us to say, hey, I have somebody in my family, or I myself have a particular disability. Would you as an organization would you have a role for me? And then of course we try and make sure that every time we get a request like this, we prioritize it. Capability of the person is a non-negotiable. So we do assess people on the same bar as we would somebody else, making, of course, the right adjustments for the tools, etc., so that the person can complete the assessment process. But in that process, then we are able to make the hiring process happen and make progress. And we found that that's actually worked well for us. The larger source of our hiring continues to be from agencies who work specifically in this space. But now that we have had some success, we are able to actually attract people more actively from the PWD community as well. LGBT has been harder. We were able to successfully hire a bunch of people from the trans community into the organization, and that has helped again convey the fact that we are fairly supportive. We also work with Pride as an organization to participate in hiring events that they conduct on an ongoing basis, and we've had some success there as well. we have done, and then we go to colleges, both professional colleges like engineering and MBA, as well as graduate level colleges, where we conduct drives specifically for either people with disabilities or people from the LGBTQ community. But what I will say, the challenge I will lay out to you is that while we are able to sort of build a pipeline at the most junior levels through some of these forums, finding people at the more senior levels has been harder, largely because of all of the stigma associated with some of these things. People don't necessarily want to share. So I might have people in senior roles, but I don't know because people have not necessarily disclosed. So I think the work for us continues to be that how do we continue to communicate? I will say we've had more success on the PWD side, where we've been able to communicate that we would like to be inclusive, and we've been able to then attract more people. But on the LGBT side also, how do we similarly communicate? I do think that the only way we will be able to get people is get people who are willing to be open about their sexuality or their gender preference, is if we are able to actively communicate and demonstrate that we are a safe organization, we are an inclusive organization. And I would say that clearly we haven't done enough work there because we haven't yet gotten to that place where people are comfortable in sharing.
That will definitely happen once you've started the initiative around it, and even having 19 people on board is a big number, because there are a number of organizations that you hardly have any people. So that is something to applaud. Now, next thing you already spoke about the senior management and what kind of support that has been there for the people with disabilities. In particular, what are the things that you look at in future, that having a diverse workforce, in what ways would it be helpful for the business growth?
So yeah, we do believe that we can continue along some of these efforts, and beyond this, I think continue to look at what kind of representation we have as an organization, and where are some of the gaps in our in creating a company that is representative of the country that we will live in, whether it is in representation of people from various different things. So that will continue to be an effort for us on an ongoing basis. At an org level, I think that we have found that as we get into more and more businesses, we as an organization start broadening the kind of problems we are willing to tackle, getting people to sort of explain their perspective on those and be able to tell us how we can incorporate their experiences into the kind of solutions that we develop, and also just sometimes be able to bring in a perspective that you may not otherwise get, is really the biggest way in which I think having a diverse organization and inclusive organization helps. The representation component is really the output or the outcome, I think. It is much more about whether the conversations and the culture allows for different kind of diversity, whether it be mental diversity, neurological diversity, physical diversity, sexual diversity, to sort of come in. It's more about the fact that you can be yourself and be successful in this organization. And just the fact that you have the representations more broadly allows that to sort of be demonstrated and proved in the organization for success to happen.
The thing that I'd like to know, whether if you wish to answer that, do you have any representation from these diverse communities in the leadership? And other than that, what are the challenges, if you have this, well and good. Other than that, in case we look at across the industry, and we look at people leading the organizations, like Tim Cook is leading Apple these days, and happens to be the largest organization. And I'd like to understand that, have you come across certain discussions of people who are against having leaders from LGBTQ community, or they are pro it, and how it has been, what has changed in past 10 or 15 years in India ever since we've started talking about the D&Is in India? So some idea on that.
Yeah. So on the I can share with you I will say that people from a disability perspective in my leadership team, we do not currently have representation, something that we do wish to correct over a period of time. Women, we did sort of focus on very specifically. Again, this is one of those things which I would say is maybe relatively easy. It's not easy, but it's relatively maybe simpler as compared to the others. We have put in some very focused attention. We have been able to increase representation, double the presence. We were kind of at about 7%. We are now at about 16%, 17% in terms of representation of women in senior leadership roles in the company. Going for as far as LGBT is concerned, all I can say over there is that, again, because we do not have a requirement for people to share their sexual preferences, we do not know. But I will say that nobody has openly sort of spoken about it, and therefore I do not know if I have significant representation at that level. The goal for us as an organization would obviously to be continuing to build that culture. We are very supportive. We very frequently, even at the leadership level, talk about this. I think fundamentally, there is a belief that people are people, and if they can deliver effectively on the job that they have, and if you can unblock them and level the playing field for people across various levels of diversity, then the org benefits, the org is able to be more successful. So I think in recent times, it has become easier and easier for people to express their support for building out a diverse organization. I think what helps is the fact that you do have representation, you have role models, you have people like Tim Cook, who we knew more as a successful business person, and only subsequently were made aware of his sexuality and realized that it has made no difference. It has continued to enable him to be long-term successful. And that's sort of, I think, the direction for all of us to also be able to take. More and more of the modern organizations in India are in a place where they are supportive, largely because we do not see this as anything more than a personality trait. It says not much more about you than the color of your skin or the shape of your nose. And those are some of the things which, again, at one point in time had a lot of biases associated with them, continue to have some biases associated with them, but are getting better. So the hope is that as we continue to have stronger representation, as organizations continue to demonstrate their commitment towards this, we will have more people, even within India, who are happy to be vocal and visible about their sexuality and about any other disability they might, or other disabilities that they might have.
So in majority of cases, once you're successful, you can talk about your orientation, anything, and everyone will be gaga about it. But in the initial stages of career, it's very difficult. I came across something that happened in 2013, and we came with the POSH Act. And it was something to empower, but it was a deterrent in terms of hiring. So any take on that? Like people wanted to get away, when they were hiring the labor force, that let's not hire women, let's only get males, so that we don't have any challenges in terms of anything happens on shop floor and they get into litigations and cases, and why take the burden of that? So this is also a mindset amongst the business community and the smaller businesses that we have. So these are the challenges which are pretty visible. So how do you see when any change in terms of policy to empower comes in, and it might be a deterrent in terms of actually empowering?
Yeah, no, I think policy helps. Policy helps make sure that the opportunity for exploitation is minimized. It does help that women in the company are able to raise complaints if they see any behavior that they find objectionable, and that we as an organization, and the fact that we as an organization then take action helps also tell people that it is safe to raise concerns. It is safe for them to to let us know if they are in any way unhappy or feel like their rights are not sort of protected. But I think the other part of it is much more the day-to-day culture that we are able to build. The fact that yes, men and women do need to work together, that women have equal voice in those conversations, that there is not an assumption that you are smarter or more competent just because you're a man, and that if there is anything unfair that happens to anyone, whether man or women, the organization will take immediate action. I think some of those things are the ones that establish, and we have found, like, organizations that are able to get more women, and I'm speaking specifically about women, given your posh example, are able to have access to more talent, are not limited by only a specific subsegment of the talent, but have their talent pool technically doubles. So my ability to compete with for good talent, my ability to actually have good people delivering on results goes up. So that by itself becomes a stronger case and becomes a reason for me to make sure that the environment is supportive of women. And I think that's kind of also the direction that we will go with the LGBT community and people with disability, where we will more and more realize that it is competence and small adjustments in the work environment that you are creating makes it so much more possible for you to be successful, because now your access to talent has gone up. And in some cases, access to talent, you have a unique advantage that you have talent that nobody else is able to leverage as well as you are.
Coming to the last point in the discussion, that in case we are not aligned with the diversity, what are the implications for the future for the businesses that would have, who are not willing to, join the thing? And in most of the cases, we see it's only a branding kind of activity. When we talk about D&I, it's just a tick mark. And when you talk about PWDs, it's just a tick mark. It's like they all look good talking about it, but on ground, things are not there. I'll just add one example to it, that we came across a lot of organizations who are talking about policies of giving exchange operations for their employees. But there are no takers for it. It's just a policy which will never be used. So such kind of initiatives and paper policies have been formulated, but there's no policy that, okay, we should have a substantial set of people who are being hired from LGBT. Nobody talks about that. Nobody talks about, okay, we need to have at least in a year X number of employees who are coming from PWDs. So how can we differentiate about the gimmickry and the real application happening? And if at all we are not aligned, what will be the implications for organizations in the long run?
Yeah, I think, yes, I think as long as somebody thinks that this is something that is either a marketing gimmick or something that you have to do for the sake of doing, it will not translate into long-term value. I mean, I'm familiar with examples of how in some countries there is actually a quota for people with disabilities, and very frequently the way companies treat it is that say, okay, I'm supposed to hire 5 people with disabilities, I will hire 5 people with disabilities, but then I will basically not expect anything from them. And that is such a disservice, not just to the individuals that you have hired, but also to the organization and the country as a whole, because you are losing out on talent that could probably have done a lot more. For me, the reason why this is something that companies need to start up and start paying attention to is for 2 reasons. One, because access to talent. My success metric over there is the very, very good work that the large IT services organizations, the Infosys, Wipro, Accenture, have been able to do in this space, where they've been able to make a significant difference in the representation of women that they have. I think some of them are actually close to 50% in terms of overall representation through actually, and this is not, I mean, it took them 15, 20 years to get here. It wasn't something that happened in a day, but they fundamentally sort of stuck with the idea of, we will keep making our work environment suitable for women. We will provide them with the support, and over a period of time, we'll get to these kind of numbers and representation. And we're all better off from it, because now the rest of us can look at these organizations and say, hey, there's all of this talent. Maybe we can get some of access to some of it. So it's largest reason for me is just that otherwise you'd be limited to a lot fewer people, women, in terms of their completion of college education, in terms of their performance in educational fields is as good and sometimes better than that of men. If you're not leveraging that talent, then you're losing out significantly on the capability that you have available in the organization. The second part of it is that unless you have different kinds of thinking models available in your organization, unless you are able to get people to have those conversations around different ways of thinking, you as an organization will very quickly fall into a rut. There will be a standard way of thinking, and you'll only be able to think in that particular way. And that, I mean, we all know if organizations cannot reinvent themselves, if they cannot innovate, if they cannot go beyond what the standard ways of thinking are, they will not survive. And so for survival itself, companies will have to create those mechanisms where they have representation of diverse pools of people, and that diverse pool of people is able to then bring in ideas, bring in thoughts that help the organization stay current, stay new, stay innovative. Not something that can happen if they do not have that opportunity.
Thank you, Manmeet. This was a great discussion that we had, and hope with the efforts that you and the HR colleagues are putting in, people will get a better space, and they'll come out and open and talk about their preferences and sexualities and everything, and overall contribute to organizational and the growth of the industry in totality, and at least the industry and the people and the workforces will be more accepting to the fact that we are all people, and we have to live together in the diverse environment. So thank you, Manmeet, and our audience will have a wonderful time listening to this.
Thank you, Denise. It was great speaking with you.
Thank you.